I'm Philip Stoughton from My House to Yours. Welcome to EMS at Sea Level. Today I'm joined by David Loftus, who is President and CEO of the Electronic Component Industry Association, known to you and I as the ECIA. David, thanks for joining me today. Let's start with a quick introduction. You've got an interesting background, and as you were saying earlier, you were pretty close to retiring before you picked up this ECIA gig.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had spent 30 years in the semiconductor business, all with Silicon Valley companies, did a stint in Asia for a few years, ran a few business units, but most of it has been on the sales and marketing side. And I retired from that at the end of 2019 and really planned to fly my plane, which you see in the background, and play golf. And somehow I got talked into this gig, but it's a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying. It keeps me in touch with, as I said, a business that I love.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, you joined at a pivotal time, really, at the beginning of 2020. We're just getting involved in the pandemic, and that's kind of a major disruption for the electronic manufacturing industry, but the component shortages seem to have been an even bigger disruption this year, or in some ways more challenging disruption as we go through a recovery. How have you seen the changes in the industry, and what's the response been like from your members who are largely in the component manufacturing and distribution business?
Well, certainly this is uncharted waters that we're in. I don't think anyone can talk about a period where there have been such wild fluctuations. While, if you look at the growth in semiconductors and the rest of the electronic components industry, it's not quite as hard a snapback on a percentage basis as a few other times, like after the dot-com bust and after the 2009 financial crisis and so forth. At the same time, it's probably confounds people a lot more based on all of the logistical challenges on top of the demand challenges. And it's just such a funny sequence of events, the way things happen, with everybody shutting down really right as the cycle was starting back up again. And so there's people actually trying to return product while others are trying to expedite product. And then everybody turns on full bore at the end of 2020, and now everyone is scrambling for product. And our members, it's an interesting conversation that we have with our different councils. We've got a distribution council and a manufacturers council and a rep council, and then we've got a board of directors. And in these different council meetings, each of the different constituents have a different set of challenges that they're trying to face. Manufacturers obviously trying to get more production capacity. Distributors are trying to get inventory and trying to navigate some of the challenges of some of the cost increases that are being passed along to their customers and so forth. And, overall, I think that everyone is trying as hard as they can to be able to get product for customers. At the same time, it's just a really interesting inflection point in the industry. As you probably know, semiconductors have run somewhat like clockwork.
On a cycle.
Years, with a boom and bust cycles every 4 or 5 years. And as I mentioned, we were just coming out of that low cycle at the end of 2019 when everybody slammed on the brakes again. And now, obviously, we've got some unmet needs that everyone's trying to chase and try to catch up to the supply chain.
Yeah, I guess you've got that huge, you've got that regular cycle, but then you've got this huge spanner in the works, which is the sudden, drop in demand in certain sectors thanks to the pandemic. The automotive industry was a great example, and that became kind of the poster child of component shortages as we read articles about lines being stopped. You've got a $50,000 car that can't be shipped because there's a $2 device missing. So that becomes critical to people. The question a lot of people are asking, and I'm hearing so many different answers, and even answers from the same people 1 month apart, is when do we think this crisis will be over? When do we think things will start to even out? What's your view and your members' view on that?
Well, I'll say that we didn't get into it all at once, and we're not going to get out of it all at once. You know, you're going to see things start to ease, I believe, through the middle of 2022. There are already a few companies that are starting to catch up, and their lead times are coming down a bit. Overall, you know, if you look at the data that we're tracking, Dale Ford's our chief analyst, really an outstanding guy, and his insights, you know, most commodities have still continued to climb in lead time, but the old saying, you know, it's always darkest before the storm, or sorry, darkest before the dawn. I do think that we are going to see a lot of easing of lead times. We won't get back to standard lead times. People aren't going to be stock to 6 weeks for probably into 2023, but you're going to start to see things ease starting in 2022. And I think as you get to mid 2022, some of the worst you know, lead time stretches that we've seen are going to start to reel in pretty significantly. The real question is what happens with you know, with world governments and the activity that and the part that they play in causing and perpetuating current situation. You know, you look at, again, we're in uncharted waters. Never in the history of mankind has close to $20 trillion been flooded into world economies. And with all that liquid, all that liquidity, there's just, and people staying at home, not spending it on travel and so forth, they're buying stuff. And, you know, it amazes me that Amazon is still able to keep, you know, 1 to 2 day deliveries with the amount of demand and the amount that their business has gone up.
Yeah.
Still, you know, I do think that just overall things will start to ease up really into 2022. And then as capacity starts to come online in 2023 and 2022, 23, then the challenge is whether we overcorrect.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting when you talk about overcorrection. And you know, whilst people are mainly concerned about getting to the end of the crisis, it's what the end of the crisis looks like. I think many people feel there's been a lot of over-ordering happened in the last few months. So that's extended order books way beyond perhaps what they even should be. And I know EMS companies are probably guilty of double booking in certain cases. And we had a lot of that in the tech wreck of at the around about 2000 when we had that dot-com bubble. There was a big inventory overhang there that we needed to deal with. So there's a concern about that. And a concern about just having visibility. Do you think there's been a lot of double ordering, over ordering? Do you think there's a challenge in how we unravel all that at the end of the crisis?
Well, certainly when a chief purchasing officer is beating on all of his people to you know, get product out the door, they're doing anything and everything they can to be able to try to secure product through any channel that they can get it. And hopefully, you know, from our perspective, we stand for the authorized channel. We hope and pray that everybody's buying through the authorized channel and not really fueling counterfeits, which is a real problem. But I'd say there's another unique factor that's going on right now, and that is, I call it alternate ordering. You know, instead of just double ordering everything that's on your bill of materials, there are so many companies whose R&D departments are qualifying alternate builds. And so if I'm a buyer and I've got my standard bill of materials, and then I'm offered an alternative build of materials that uses a different microprocessor, different kind of memory, I'm going to put full orders on the books for that as well. and
Yeah.
you get double ordering for, you know, the amount of end product you get, but it's on alternate products. So it's not as easy for manufacturers and distributors to be able to track that. They just see additional business on their books, and obviously they work to try to fulfill that. And so I really, you know, I certainly want everybody to get all the product that they want, and in a timely fashion and at a reasonable price. At the same time, I do have some concerns for the industry and the fact that we are going to have an overcorrection. I guarantee it.
Yeah, no, I can't see any other way either. I think it's everybody scrambling, and we are in that position where, you know, there isn't clear visibility, and when we start to reel it all back, it's going to unravel in quite a messy way. So we need as much clarity on that. We need as much digital transformation, as much data in the system as we can to get past that. I want to wind back to something you mentioned earlier, which is the governments and the amount of money that's swashing around in the system. And I think it's fascinating to me when I see the way governments are dealing with the post-pandemic recovery. People are throwing money at it, but with throwing money at things, there's always a danger that the money will land in the wrong places. And I think that's a big challenge. And I look at the supply chain, the importance of supply chain national security, the importance of manufacturing, particularly electronics manufacturing, as a strategic part of any government's recovery plan. And I wonder if they understand enough about the industry that you and I have been in for decades. How do you see that, and how are the ECIA able to, you know, support government, inform government, lobby government to get them to do things right?
Well, to your first part of your question, how much do they understand? What do they understand? I'll start with a little story. I was involved with the Semiconductor Industry Association, another big group that actually focuses more on public policy, maybe even than ECIA. And I was a board alternate for a number of years for a couple of different CEOs. And we used to make pretty regular lobbying trips to DC. And so this trip was to Capitol Hill maybe a year or two after Obama was brought in. Obama had an objective to be able to double exports within 5 years. He wanted to try to right the trade imbalance with China and so forth, and really try to rebuild American manufacturing. And so you would think that our Congress would understand what are the big export industries already for the US. As it turns out, semiconductors go back and forth between automotive and aircraft as 1, 2, and 3 in export business for the United States. And so I and about 20 other CEOs and senior executives went to meet with the Senate Majority Leader at the time, a guy by the name of Harry Reid. And we sat down around his conference room table in the US Capitol and waited about 45 minutes for Harry to show up. So it was a very expensive waiting period. Mm-hmm. And Harry Reid comes in and reads a couple pieces of paper that were handed to him by some aides. And he sits down at the table and he says, "What's a semiconductor?"
Okay.
Like, you know, the
third we're in trouble.
Most powerful person in the United States. And he's got no idea who he's talking to. So, you know, that sticks with me. And the number of times that I've been in Washington and try to talk with people about in power about our industry, it's just remarkable how little they do understand of the dynamics. The current situation right now is there's a huge what they call a social infrastructure bill in front of Congress. There's an infrastructure bill and then a social infrastructure bill, and it's you know, well over $3.5 trillion in spending for the U.S. And the government has decided that, gee, this shortage is really bad. We really need to get more semiconductor manufacturing back in the US. US semiconductor companies in title run about 50%, little over 50% of the worldwide semiconductor market. At the same time, US semiconductor production has fallen from high 30% 25, 30 years ago to it's about 12% today. And so the US government is working with ECIA and us and NAM and the National Association of Manufacturers to be able to say, okay, what do we need to do to be able to try to get more of this back into the US? And so one answer they come up with is subsidies. So they want to offer $52 billion to US and worldwide semiconductor companies to be able to build new fabs in the US. So they want to give with one hand, but the other side of it is to pay for all these social programs that they want to be able to roll out. They want to be able to raise corporate taxes back to the rates that they were pre-2017 when the Trump administration rolled them back. And I'm not here to talk politics one way or the other, but I will say that, you know, the US before that had the highest corporate tax rate of all OECD countries.
Right.
And they, with a rollback that happened in 2017, we got a little bit more competitive. But now they want to be able to raise those tax rates back. Biden wanted to raise them all the way back to 28%. They were trying to agree on 26%. Now it looks like maybe they will back off of that. We don't know. That's just still up in the air. They're trying to find any way they can to be able to pay for these social spending packages, and they want to be able to take that from corporations that they believe have deeper pockets, and they would make us uncompetitive again. So, you know, I believe that if that were to happen, that would dramatically reduce the likelihood that fabs and foundries would be brought back to U.S. shores. And it's a similar situation, conversation in many other countries, not just to talk about the U.S., but there's just a lot of wish fors without a lot of pay fors.
Yeah, well, that's always the case, isn't it? I mean, we're seeing some news of investment, you know, TSMC in Arizona, Global Foundries up on the East Coast. How do you see those, and are they going to have an impact?
I'm all for them doing that. Intel as well. You should mention they are talking about $20 billion, but all three of those deals, those CEOs have made it very clear that that those deals will not go forward unless they see
without the right tax rate
subsidies. And they've not made the comment, but I would suspect that it also is completely dependent on that tax rate as well. I mean, why would somebody bring something to a more expensive place to produce if they're going to be taxed higher and so forth? And now that idea of subsidies has been floated, it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah.
It's very easy for these companies to leverage. Now, I certainly hope that that semiconductor fabs and foundries are put in countries that are stable politically and stable economically.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the US. I'd like it to be the US as a US citizen. At the same time, you know, Europe is also trying to stimulate more investment, Japan and so forth. So what we really don't want to see is the source of our business, the goose that laid the golden egg, to be in for there to be building in places where there could be political uncertainty. That would be that's would be a big concern.
Yeah, I think those geopolitical risks are significant and real, and you know, people need to be aware of those. David, let's play president for a day. You've got the checkbook. What would you be doing to stimulate the semiconductor industry and support the US semiconductor industry specifically at the moment?
Well, I wouldn't say that subsidies are bad, but I would put that on a tax holiday kind of thing where you would then be able to regain full tax rates at the right level when you need to be. I would want to make sure that our tax rates for those production corporations are competitive with other other governments, and I would try to really put in place more favorable operating conditions for these businesses. And right now, there's a lot of new activity with EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency here in the US, that is also problematic for fabs and foundries because semiconductors just use a lot of chemicals that are dangerous. There should be the correct controls in place so that make sure that there's not accidental release of chemicals and so forth, or expose workers. At the same time, you don't want those to be overly burdensome. And the other thing is that here in the U.S., we need to get our immigration policies fixed. There are parts of the immigration policy that are very important to high tech. The U.S. has some of the educates the best and brightest of the world here at our universities. We graduate tens of thousands of PhDs every year in electronics and device physics and things like that. Yet we still have limits on H-1B visas that that force people that have come here for their education and want to work for U.S. tech corporations. We force them back home to compete against us. We still haven't figured that one out then after 30 years of wrangling, because it's tied up with, what do we do with all the immigrants that have come across our southern border? And when you try to tie, they're only related by the word immigration. They're completely separate problems that should be dealt separately. But unfortunately, with our intelligent people in Washington, there are groups that want to couple those together and won't move on one without the other. So
I think that's a huge challenge. And it's really interesting. I've spoken to a number of economists over the last few months, and we've specifically talking about the tech industry, and they see 2022 as a year of two shortages. One shortage is devices, the other shortage is talent, and it plays into exactly what you're talking about. How do we make sure that talent is available, so that we can help with the shortage of devices? Because if we are forcing talent overseas and forcing talent into a competitive landscape, then it's definitely a big issue. And what you say about taxation is really interesting, because whenever I talk to a CEO and ask them what they would do about incentives, they always say, don't mess with anything apart from giving us the ability to invest our own money properly. We know the industry, we know what we're doing. Incentivize us to do it. Don't try and do it for us. It's almost like make it easier for us, but kind of stay out of the way a little bit. Is that kind of what your members, the feedback you get?
Absolutely. We have some of the brightest people on the planet that are running semiconductor and electronic components in industry companies, and it's really just government getting out of the way for the most part that most CEOs would wish for. And there doesn't have to be a tremendous amount of incentive to be able to get U.S. companies to do the right things, to be able to drive growth, to be able to drive tax revenue, to be able to drive to drive employment opportunities for a lot of people. It's just a matter of really having a business friendly environment that will allow companies to be able to thrive based on the talent and the passions that they already have.
Yeah. And when I look at, when I look at the US, and I feel a bit the same about Western Europe, I think it's important to focus on the kind of building blocks that are clearly there. You have a fantastic consumer market. You have a fantastic record for innovation, the best record in the world probably, and all those capabilities. So the raw ingredients are there. It's just a question of building up the infrastructure beneath that. And in semiconductor industry, it typically costs more and it takes longer. It's not cheap to build a semiconductor facility, and it doesn't happen overnight. Are you optimistic about what's happening going forward? Are you optimistic about the way the supply chain will operate in the future in the semiconductor industry in North America?
I'm highly optimistic about the industry. I just think that whatever the governments do, it may not turn out exactly in the right places where certain governments want. It may play toward one versus another geographically. At the same time, I'm tremendously optimistic that there are fundamental growth vectors that are going to continue to drive this industry. You've got industrial 4.0, you've got automation in cars and electrical vehicles and 5G and IoT and data center. All these things are just tremendous growth vectors that are going to continue to drive fantastic growth opportunities. And we continue to attract very, very talented people to this industry. So I don't see that there's any downside risk that our world is going to implode in electronics. These companies are all almost all very, very profitable companies. They're throwing off a lot of good money to investors, so it continues to attract investment. And from that perspective, I do believe that in spite of the current supply challenges and in spite of some, in some cases, poorly designed government programs that become a little bit of a stumbling block, those are really more speed bumps than they are roadblocks. And I do think that I do hope that this business cycle is a learning process for the industry. I know you represent your EMS customers well, and overall, we talked about automotive earlier. We touched on that, and I after every huge uptick that we see like this, every cycle, and I've gone through now 5 or 6 of them in my career. I think that, wow, now we're really going to learn the lessons. And then, 2 years later, there's complete amnesia, and everyone wants to trim their inventories and go to just-in-time deliveries, and they want to cut out the channel, and everybody wants to go direct, and there's. I hope that the goal of supply chain security really registers and really resonates and that people remember. Because I penned an article number of months back about the fact that automotive, these guys really shot themselves in the foot. They forced themselves to be direct supplier or direct with many suppliers that they really should have been through the channel. And the channel, while they're now struggling for parts as well, we would have had a lot less problems with the automotive business if they had been in the right part of the
channel.
Yeah. And
yeah.
It would have been
I think
much easier for them. That we would have had tens of thousands of workers that would not have been idled, and massive parking lots and stadium filled up with unfinished cars.
No, I think you're right, David. And it's what I think is always really interesting when you have these crises is the pendulum swings aggressively. So we've swung from just in time to just in case quite aggressively. Hopefully we don't swing all the way back. We settle somewhere smart. But I share your optimism for the industry. I think the opportunities for the industry are huge. And the continued development in technology is creating more and more demand and more opportunities for good players in the industry. There's lots of investment capital in electronics and electronic manufacturing and in smart manufacturing. So lots to do there. I think it's fascinating, and I share your optimism. Just before we wrap up, you mentioned articles you penned. I read an article about a Metro Atlanta pilot whose iPhone survived a fall out of an aircraft. I'm curious on two things. How do you drop an iPhone out of a plane? Have you got the window down and you're trying to cool it down or something? What are you doing when your phone falls out of your aircraft?
Well, just like the picture you see in my background, I do like to snap pictures from my airplane, and it does have very small windows you can open to the inside, and it's much nicer picture if you can take it through clear air rather than through the plexiglass canopy. And so, yes, a couple of months ago, I was flying across northern Arkansas, of all places, at 11,500 feet, saw an interesting cloud formation. And so I opened the window, and normally I hold the phone maybe about 2 inches inside the aircraft so that it doesn't get sucked out by the slipstream. But unfortunately, I hit a little pocket of turbulence, and my hand moved just a little bit too close to the window, and it sucked the iPhone right out. But I'm happy to say that due to some successful mapping from Find My iPhone, I actually that's it.
It's still there and it works.
11,500 feet from the window of that aircraft down in the middle of a soybean field, and I was able to track it down without a scratch on it.
Wow, what an amazing drop test! There you go. That's an advertisement for technology if I ever heard one. David, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for your insight. I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Very much enjoyed listening to you with regard to the industry, and like you, I'm optimistic about the future. So thanks for your time, and look forward to chatting again soon. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.